Good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from Los Angeles. And here's some of the stories we're watching tonight. Writer E. Jean Carroll wins her lawsuit against former President Donald Trump to the tune of $5 million. Then a big budget standoff.
America is not a deadbeat nation. We pay our bills.
But if President Biden and leaders in Congress can't agree on raising the debt ceiling, what happens next? Then, thanks to AI, mind reading is no longer the stuff of science fiction. But does that mean that machines could start peering into our private thoughts? And speaking of thoughts, Snoop Dogg shares his thinking on how artists should get paid on streaming platforms.
I don't know who the running the streaming industry, if you in here or not. But to give us some information on how to track this money down.
And we start with the big news out of New York, where a jury unanimously found former President Donald Trump liable for the sexual assault and defamation of writer E. Jean Carroll. Now, the jury of 6 men and 3 women made that decision in just 3 hours. They also found Trump liable for causing Carroll injury, acting recklessly with her, making malicious statements, and more. And because of that, Trump will have to pay her $5 million. But the jury found that he was not liable for the allegations of rape. And in a statement, Carroll said she filed this lawsuit to get her life back. She also says it wasn't just for her, but for every woman who suffered because she wasn't believed. Trump, on the other hand, maintains he did not know who Carroll was and called the verdict a disgrace. NBC legal analyst Danny Savalos joins us now. Danny, I want to play a quick piece of Trump's deposition where he addressed that infamous 2016 Access Hollywood tape that played a big role in this case. Let's take a quick listen.
And you say, and again, this has become very famous in this video, I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. Just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab them by the you can do anything. That's what you said, correct?
Well, historically, that's true with stars.
It's true with stars that they can grab women by the
Well, that's what it's. If you look over the last million years, I guess that's been largely true. Not always, but largely true. Unfortunately or fortunately.
Well, there are a few different videos of the deposition that are kind of similar there. Do you think that those videos were kind of the smoking gun in this case?
This is Exhibit A. The question that was asked was, is that what you said? The answer, as I would advise my client, is yes, period. Next question. Instead, Trump editorializes. He didn't have to double down. He didn't have to defend that statement. He didn't have to endorse it, but he did. He went improv, and that's an example, and I just wrote a column about this up on MSNBC.com right now, that this deposition transcript buried him with unforced errors. This is not a situation where he had to answer a question and it was bad for him. He volunteered this stuff. That is a perfect example. He didn't need to go on into that explanation of how he thinks the world works for celebrities. He could have simply answered, did you say that? Yes, I did. Everybody in the entire known universe knows that Donald Trump said what he said on the Access Hollywood tape.
This isn't a civil case. This is a civil case, not a criminal case. So Trump was found liable for sexual assault, but in a civil case, not criminal court. How big of a difference is there, and why?
It's the biggest difference in the law in that it's not a criminal case, and it will never be a criminal case. The statute of limitations has long since expired, and the only reason this is a civil case is because New York opened up a one-time, one-year statute of limitations waiver, I guess you would call it, a window for people to bring their claims however old they are. I'm handling some of these similar claims, and the biggest problem is it's fine to file a complaint. That's great. How do you prove something that happened decades and decades ago? This case may stand for the proposition that maybe these cases are viable many decades later, and especially when you're trying to find evidence from the 90s in a really pre-internet, pre-email, pre-text message, pre-cell phone era.
And Danny, why did they find him liable for sexual assault and not the allegations of rape?
The sexual abuse is the sexual contact plus lack of consent. Rape is the intercourse plus use of force. So that is, while we may not know what their deliberations are unless they come out and tell us, all we can conclude is that they found there was no forcible intercourse, but there was contact without consent.
Danny Savalos, thanks so much. And tonight we are learning more about the alleged gunman in the deadly mass shooting at a Texas outlet mall. Investigators say the shooter bought his guns legally, targeted people randomly, and scouted the mall before the attack. And they also confirmed that the gunman appeared to hold neo-Nazi beliefs. And while the motive is still unknown, what we do know is this. Right now, 8 people are dead, 7 were hurt, and among the dead were 3 kids. Daniela Mendoza, who was 11, her sister Sophia, who was 8, and James Cho, who was just 3 years old. Joining us now is NBC News and Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney. And Ken, let's start real fast with what investigators confirmed about the shooter today. Yesterday, there was a lot of confusion on what might be misinformation. Today, we've heard authorities backing up a lot of what you reported about the alleged shooter's social media activity, right?
Yeah, that's right, Gadi. And, I spent hours going through hundreds of social media posts and photos posted by this shooter. And it's a really disturbing pattern that sadly matches up with a lot of other postings from other mass shooters. Yes, he was a white supremacist, neo-Nazi, incel, involuntary celibate, identified with that movement, very bitter towards women. But more than that, he was just an isolated, antisocial person who had no friends, who did hold down jobs, but talked about how, for example, people at jobs would joke about him becoming a mass shooter and saying that when you come to shoot up this place, please spare me. And he would write in this, what essentially was a diary, that these people saw through him. And then he began posting photos of the weapons that he purchased, receipts of the weapons. And then a week or two before the shooting, he was posting photos of the outlet mall, maps of the outlet mall, even a screenshot of a Google thing that showed like when it was most highly attended, when the most people were at this mall. So it was there in plain sight, but this was on a Russian social media site that law enforcement apparently was not looking at. So a really sad and tragic trail left by this shooter.
Ken, I got to ask, the SS and the swastika tattoos, possible Hitler quotes, all of that seems to be built on the racist idea that the Aryan race is superior, and yet the shooter's Latino. Was there anything in his postings that explained that disconnect?
Yeah, he was, like, for example, he was very anti-immigrant. I mean, I don't know if it's accurate to say he considered himself to be white, whatever that means, but there is a phenomenon of Hispanic white supremacists, as it were, or far-right extremists. You have Enrique Tarrio of the Proud Boys, Nick Fuentes is a well-known neo-Nazi. It does exist, and this person, according to his writings, clearly espoused these beliefs and was extremely... it was very far right on the ideological spectrum, anti-immigrant, and just disliked people of other races.
And Kim, we've also got some news tonight that I wanted to ask you about. NBC News now confirms that the Justice Department has charged a Republican Congressman, George Santos, for some possible crime. This has got your byline on it. What do we know about that?
Yeah, so the charges are still under seal, so we don't know the nature of these charges. Obviously, Congressman George Santos has been under investigation for a long time. There are so many questions about not only his resume, but how he funded his campaign. He's been accused of all manner of things, from sexual harassment to stealing money from a homeless veteran that was intended to help his dog. So we don't know what these charges are, but we expect him to appear in court, in federal court in Brooklyn tomorrow, where we'll learn a lot more about this case, Gadi.
Hopefully we'll get some answers then. Ken Delaney, thanks so much.
You bet.
And President Joe Biden met with top congressional leaders today about whether the U.S. should change the max amount it's allowed to borrow. Right now, the Treasury Department has said that the government will run out of money by June 1st unless Congress raises the debt ceiling or the borrowing limit. And while leaders keep saying that the United States will not default, it didn't seem like there was a lot of agreement on the actual details that would avoid a crisis in today's meeting.
I was very clear with the president. We have now just 2 weeks to go. If Chuck Schumer could pass something, we'd go to conference right away and solve that. But I don't think Chuck Schumer can pass anything. They haven't dealt with it.
Again, repeat our plea to Speaker McCarthy. take default off the table and let's resume negotiations in the budget process.
NBC's White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us now. So, Monica, just real quick refresher here. What is each side asking for?
Yeah, and both sides are completely dug in. That's the major takeaway here, Gadi, after this meeting that did last more than an hour in the Oval Office. The White House, the president saying they don't even want to negotiate over something like the debt ceiling because they think it's just too important to do it and move on, as Congress has done for decades under both Democratic and Republican presidents. So they would like to see what's known as a clean raise of the debt ceiling. Republicans, for their part, say they don't want to do that unless it's attached to major spending cuts. So something they would like the White House to commit to when it comes to a larger budget. But the White House has said they don't want to tie those things together. But it really seems, again, that even though this meeting face-to-face was a little bit of progress in itself because we didn't know if this was going to happen this week, they didn't really have any major breakthroughs or resolutions here, but they did commit to coming together again on Friday. Gadi.
Yeah, it seems like the progress is we'll get it done. We just don't know how. This all comes as Biden's approval rating is hitting an all-time low. How much of a role does public opinion play into all this?
Yeah, because even when you ask people, like some of my colleagues who've been talking to voters, who would you blame theoretically in this instance if the debt ceiling isn't raised, if the U.S. goes and defaults? A lot of people would say the president. They would say the commander-in-chief. They would say he's in charge. So that's something that the White House is keenly aware of, but they're continuing to make this argument that it's Republicans in the House who are holding this process hostage by engaging in some of this brinkmanship. But again, it is both sides who are staying firm in their positions, even though they have agreed now that their staffs can come together in the next couple of days before Friday to talk a little bit about the budget aspect, which does show, Gadi, there's a little bit of incremental movement. But we just heard from the president a little bit ago after this meeting, and he said that the tenor was very serious, at times tense in these conversations, even implying that Speaker McCarthy, he said, made some assertions that needed to be fact-checked in real time. So these two men, Speaker McCarthy and President Biden, don't have a super close relationship, and that would be important in these high-stake level discussions and talks going forward. But they all agreed, they said, that nobody is interested in seeing the U.S. take on this kind of financial catastrophe that's never been done before in our history.
Monica, let's say they don't have an agreement by June 1st. What does a timeline start to look like in terms of shutdowns and possible jobs lost?
Yeah, and the reason we're talking about this just a couple of weeks away, it becomes even more complicated because the president is scheduled to head overseas next week to Japan and Australia, so he'd be more removed from the conversations. But they are warning that if that were to happen around June, now the date is a little bit flexible according to the Treasury Secretary, you could see up to 8 million jobs wiped out. Federal benefits that so many people rely on would be frozen. The stock markets would likely tumble. That could lead to a recession. And we really just don't even know, what else would happen, because, again, we've never been in this exact circumstance before. So everybody's working really hard to avoid it, even though, as you said, they haven't been able to identify how they're going to do that.
Monica Alba, thanks so much. My dream is gone. Those are the words of a man who lost his leg in that deadly bus stop crash out of Texas. We're going to share his plea to President Biden and the latest on the investigation. And later this hour, you knew it was only a matter of time. Well, now a new study shows how artificial intelligence could read your mind. You're not going to want to miss that, so stick around. Welcome back, and here's some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. Today, former Fox News host Tucker Carlson said he is relaunching his show on Twitter. Now, that could leave $25 million on the table in order to break his non-compete clause with Fox. Tucker was fired from the network last month. And FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried is looking to get all those felony charges against him dropped. His lawyers say the federal government is building a case against him without having any crucial evidence. Prosecutors say Bankman-Fried cheated investors and customers out of billions of dollars. A trial has tentatively been set for the fall. And the search is on for 2 inmates who escaped from a Philadelphia prison, and both men got an 18-hour head start, because that's how long it took before prison officials finally figured out that they were gone. One of the men was being held on gun charges, the other on 4 murder charges. And California is talking about extending PTSD benefits to first responders. A proposed law would allow more paramedics, firefighters, and police officers to get access to workers' comp benefits. But some business groups are against it, warning about the potential for fraud and abuse of the system. And women should start getting breast cancer screening at 40 years old instead of the previous recommendations for mammograms at 50. Health experts are now saying the new guidance comes after seeing an increase in breast cancer diagnosis of younger women with higher death rates among Black women. And Title 42 is set to end in about 48 hours. That's the COVID-era health order used to kick out migrants of the country immediately citing health concerns. Now, the rule will no longer be enforced come midnight on Thursday, and with border crossings already at a historic high, U.S. officials expect those numbers to spike even more once Title 42 goes away. Now, these aerials show just the sheer number of people waiting behind the fence here, thousands each day from across Latin America and even coming as far as Europe and Asia, many crossing and turning themselves in immediately, where they will be processed and either released or expelled. NBC News correspondent Gadi Venegas joins us now from Tijuana, Mexico. Guad, you were in California yesterday on the other side of the border. Today you're in Tijuana. How's the situation there?
Gadi, well, we know that the shelters are almost at capacity here in Tijuana. Now, this city has had migrant surges in the past, so they've been able to prepare for years. We have numerous shelters in the city of Tijuana and also across the border in San Diego. There's numerous organizations that help the migrants that are able to stay in the U.S. and seek asylum. So the infrastructure has helped with the surge coming to the city. Now, we saw the images of the migrants that are crossing from Tijuana into San Diego right at the border, right where the fence is at, that they're sort of stuck in no man's land. That's a group that remains today, from 300 to 400 of them, waiting for Border Patrol in the U.S. to then take them in for processing. Now, in Tijuana, we visited a shelter. We went to one of the larger ones. They have about 1,700 individuals there. That's one of about 30 that are in the Tijuana area. They say they're pretty much at capacity, but we have to be clear that the chaos we've seen in other parts of the border in other Mexican cities is not happening in Tijuana, because this city is prepared for an influx of migrants. We were also told that authorities here are expecting a larger influx as we get closer to the lifting of Title 42, Gadi.
Among the migrants that you've been speaking to over the last few days, do they know what Title 42 is for the most part, or what the new CBP policies are when it comes to the app that they want people to use?
Gadi, I think that immigration policy is complicated and it's not easy to understand. I think that if we were to have a conversation with most Americans, it would be very difficult for anyone to explain what Title 42 means and what's going to happen after Title 42 is lifted. In fact, Mayorkas, DHA Secretary Mayorkas is still expected to speak and give more details about the new immigration policies that are still coming to be implemented after Title 42 is lifted. So it's not surprising that when we ask migrants if they understand, they tell us they understand some things, but they're also confused. Now, the government put out this app, right, the CBP One app that migrants can use to request asylum. They get an appointment and then they turn themselves in at the port of entry. This is the legal way that they say, but the app has had some issues and it's been quite difficult for a lot of individuals to get those appointments. We did speak with a Cuban migrant today who said after 2 months of trying, he finally was able to get that appointment. He was very happy because today was the day that he came to the port of entry to request asylum. Here's part of the conversation we had with him.
Pero sí se cae a la hora ya, después que se escanea a la hora de tirar la foto, son muchos días. Una constancia grande, pero nada, sí se logra.
¿Y cuánto tiempo duraste?
Estuvimos 22 días, pero conozco personas de 3 meses. Desde que empezó, que hablaron el 6 de enero.
So we would say that that's one of the lucky ones, Gadi, because he was able to get an appointment, and today he entered the United States the legal way to seek asylum. But meanwhile, we do have thousands that are entering the United States, not just here, but also we've seen in the Texas border with Mexico that are just going into the U.S. to request this asylum by turning themselves into Border Patrol. But most of the migrants, again, when we speak to them, Gadi, and we ask them if they understand what will happen with the new policy, they say they don't understand done much. They do tell me that they continue trying to get an appointment in the app, even those that have decided to cross illegally. Gadi?
And real quick, one more question. You know, we're talking so much about policy, but when you get to the border, there's policy and then there's rumor. What are the rumors that you're hearing right now on the Mexico side as people approach the United States border?
Well, Gadi, one of the things we've heard from Mexican officials and also from officials in the U.S., Mallorca spoke about this, is that smugglers will often take any sort of news and twist the information to convince migrants to come to the U.S. So the rumors, for example, I was in the shelter today speaking to a lot of women, and they said there were rumors that things are going to get much more complicated for them to seek asylum. So that would explain why many migrants have decided to try to enter the U.S. now before Title 42 is lifted. But then another woman walked up and said, well, I heard a rumor that it's actually going to be easier. So again, these are rumors that come with confusion and misinformation that authorities say is usually promoted by a lot of the smugglers. Now, I should add one more thing, Gadi, that I've seen here today, and it's also happening in other parts of the border. Many of the migrants that we are seeing on the Mexican side that are part of this surge are migrants that have already attempted to enter the United States. They turned themselves in to Border Patrol. Border Patrol put them in vehicles and then sent them back to Mexico. I spoke with a man today who said he crossed in Texas. He told me he was put on a plane in Brownsville, and that plane came to Mexico, and today he arrived in Tijuana. I spoke to another man who said he crossed the border in Mexicali near the Arizona border. They put him in a van. They brought him here, and today he arrived in Tijuana. Most of them told me they went through a very confusing interview. They didn't know where they were going, and when they arrived at their location, they walked out, and suddenly they were in Mexico. So a lot of the migrants we're seeing here are migrants that already went into the U.S. and have been expelled back to Mexico under Title 42. They're sort of in limbo, not knowing if they should try to apply using the app or try to go back across and request asylum. So it's a bit chaotic and also confusing for the migrants, Gadi.
Fascinating details and very specific details in this very confusing time. Gadi Venegas, thanks so much for your reporting. Now let's stay in Texas and head now to Brownsville. That's where a driver hit a crowd of asylum seekers early Sunday outside of a migrant shelter, killing 8 men, all from Venezuela, and hurting 10 others. Last night, the community gathered for an emotional vigil to honor the victims, some of whom are still in the hospital, like Gabriel Gallardo. He is a native of Venezuela.
De verdad, yo llegué por un sueño, darle un mejor futuro a mis hijos. Llegué ayer y resulta que llegué y pues ahora resulta que no tengo pierna, no tengo, mis sueños todos se han roto, se han ido, no tengo palabras ni para expresarme lo que siento ya, tanto dolor, tanto esfuerzo, tanto sufrimiento que pasé para llegar hasta aquí, para que sucediera esto. Ay, me siento mal, no sabes cuánto mal me siento por todo.
And joining us now is NBC's Gabe Gutierrez in Brownsville right now. Gabe, so all of these victims are from Venezuela, right? Does that mean that they were among those to cross through some of the most dangerous jungles in the world, survive the trek through all of Central America, Mexico, and then die at a bus stop in Texas?
Gadi, sadly, that is what happened. And several of the migrants we have spoken with have said the sad irony, if you want to call it that, or just this, they're just so frustrated that these migrants went through all that, went through the Darien Gap, went through dangerous spots in Mexico, survived assault attempts, and then had to die at a bus stop under these circumstances. It is just heartbreaking to hear. It's heartbreaking to hear that a migrant, you heard Gabriel, inside that hospital. And his wife, actually, Gadi, is in Colombia right now with her 2 children, trying to get into the United States as well. She's desperate. She's asking President Biden for help even, and it was just very emotional. It's just really heartbreaking to see what's going on. And Gadi, this is something that has had this entire community reeling. It is stunned. And Brownsville, of course, and you see behind me, we're here near the border. This is a community that is also dealing with the impacts of the expiration of Title 42 in the next few days. State resources are here behind me trying to deal with the expected influx of migrants there. And then, of course, just several days before that, this tragedy happens not far from here at that migrant shelter. And again, this community just completely devastated. Gadi.
And Gabe, what's the latest on the investigation, and what do we know about the suspect, George Alvarez?
Well, the latest we know is that 3 of the 7 victims who were injured, they have been released from the hospital. It's hard to get any more updated information than that. Authorities have not released that or released their names. The suspect, though, George Alvarez, again, he has been charged with 8 counts of manslaughter, 10 counts of aggravated assault. And at this point, authorities have not ruled out that this crash could have been intentional. They also are still waiting on toxicology results because several of the migrants we spoke with, several of the witnesses, some of them actually jumped in to detain the suspect while they waited for police to arrive. Some of them said that he appeared to be drunk. He does have a lengthy criminal history, according to police, including driving while intoxicated. But again, authorities have not confirmed that he was intoxicated. This time around, they're waiting on those toxicology results. Investigation still ongoing, and other charges or upgraded charges could be pending, depending on those toxicology results. Got it.
Another difficult day in Brownsville, Texas. Gabe Gutierrez, thank you so much. Next, if you've got kids who are on social media, you're going to want to hear this. There are some new guidelines out today for parents looking for ways to keep their kids safe online. But first, you got to see this. A terrifying moment out of Loveland, Ohio, as a truck crashes into the patio of a restaurant. Look at that, taking out tables, chairs, even the patio awning. All of this happened Friday night. Now, the driver then left the crash, but turned himself in to police over the weekend. He's been charged with leaving the scene of an accident, and miraculously, police say only minor injuries were reported. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's get you caught up in 30 seconds. Republican Congressman George Santos has just been charged by the Department of Justice. That's what 4 sources familiar with the matter are telling NBC News. And he could surrender in New York as early as tomorrow morning. And migrants are arriving at the border by the thousands, and that number could jump significantly come Thursday night when a pandemic-era policy called Title 42 comes to an end. And writer E. Jean Carroll wins her lawsuit against former President Donald Trump. It took less than 3 hours for the jury to reach its unanimous verdict. Today, a jury found former President Donald Trump liable for sexually abusing and defaming writer E. Jean Carroll, awarding her $5 million in damages. Now, there have been a lot of pivotal moments in this case, including a few from the former president's sworn deposition, where Trump seemed to contradict himself. He had been insisting that the allegations were baseless and Carroll wasn't his type. But then, looking at pictures, he mistook Carroll for his ex-wife, Marla Maples. Watch.
I don't even know who the woman. Let's see. I don't know who. It's Marla.
You're saying Marla's in this photo?
That's Marla. Yeah, that's my wife.
Which woman are you pointing to? No.
Here.
Carroll.
Oh,
the person you just pointed to was E. Jean Carroll.
NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett joins us now. Laura, what did you make of the verdict? Did that moment of mistaken identity seal the jury's decision?
It's hard not to think that the deposition played a major role in that verdict today, Gadi. I think the number alone, $5 million, after she had never really asked for any amount at all, was meant to send a message. The fact that the former president never showed up in court, instead posting photos of him out on golf courses, I think was, again, something that this jury might have noticed. It was certainly something that Carroll's attorneys hammered home during their closing arguments. I also think another part of that deposition tape where he actually is referencing what he said in that infamous Access Hollywood tape and then essentially doubles down when talking about stars grabbing women. He says it's historically true. And not only that, he says it's unfortunately or fortunately something that Carroll's attorney really focused on, saying to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, who would say something like that? And without Trump there to counter that type of narrative in person, I think it was devastating.
I think we have some of that sound. If we can cue that up and take a listen.
And you say, and again, this has become very famous in this video, I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. Just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab them by the you can do anything. That's what you said, correct?
Well, historically, that's true with stars.
It's true with stars that they can grab women by the
Well, if you look over the last million years, I guess that's been largely true. Not always, but largely true. Unfortunately or fortunately.
unfortunately. That's the part of it I think really is devastating, because he is left only with that deposition for the jury to evaluate really just his own words.
The deposition, his own words, and yet he did not show up for court. I think we've got time for one more clip from the deposition. This is where Trump attacks the physical appearance of E. Jean Carroll's attorney, right? Let's take a watch.
She would not be my first choice, that I can tell you. Man, you don't know. That would not be my first choice.
When you said in that video that Ms. Leeds would not be your first choice, you were referring to her physical looks, correct?
Just the overall. I look at her, I see her, I hear what she says, whatever. You wouldn't be a choice of mine either, to be honest with you. I hope you're not insulted. I would not, under any circumstances, have any interest in you. I'm honest when I say it.
So just so people understand the context there, he's being confronted with yet another allegation by an entirely separate woman who says that he made advances on her on an airplane years ago, a claim that he's denied. But in the context of being asked about that, instead of just saying, I did not do that, he's then attacking Carroll's attorney's physical appearance. And I think, again, one of the exchanges that without him being there in person to counter it, has to be something that weighed on the minds of this jury.
Yeah, that jury watching Trump watch Trump and yet not seeing him answer questions directly.
Exactly.
Or Jerry, thanks so much.
Sure.
All right, one of the biggest issues when it comes to having teenagers these days, we have been debating the impact of social media on kids and teens for years now. We've seen Senate hearings, Netflix documentaries, even whistleblowers sounding the alarm from deep within Facebook. And now today, for the first time, the American Psychological Association is getting involved. They've released a set of 10 guidelines designed to protect children from the risks of social media. Some of them are just common sense, like minimizing content depicting harmful behavior or cyber hate. But there's also less obvious recommendations, like how teens should be trained in media literacy. Joining us now is Dr. Sue Varma, a board-certified psychiatrist. Dr. Varma, thanks so much for joining us. What do you make of these guidelines from what you've seen personally in your practice? Or a lot of these just good common sense that you've been given for quite some time? Anything new in here? And most importantly, which one of these guidelines do you think parents definitely need to pay attention to?
You know, I think they're all really important. I think it's about time that we had a set of guidelines that parents can turn to say, hey, it's not me. The American Psychological Association has done the scientific research on it. A lot of times the struggle is the parents and the kids or the teens butting heads. And now that there's a guideline to turn to, specifically the idea of physical activity and sleep should not be compromised. I think it's really important that when we look at the studies and we see correlation between increased anxiety and depression in the kids that are using it, it's usually because their sleep and physical activity and in-person social connections are being compromised. We also know that cyberbullying, the hateful comments, are so damaging. Also, children putting videos of themselves out there and then getting the hate comments and not having control over it, feeling lack of agency over what their information is out there. But also the negative comparisons of looking online and the body image issues that comes from that, the self-esteem that goes down, also feeling left out with friends at schools, vacations, trips that kids are not a part of. So it's always this feeling of, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And the guidelines and this report came out and saying it's inherently neither. It's not inherently good. It's not inherently bad. It's here to stay. And kids really should be trained in it the way that they would have to get a license for driving a car. This should be treated no differently.
It's fascinating to hear you say that. I got to admit, when I was reading into it this morning, I was like, great, there's nothing new here. This is something that we've heard counselors saying for years now. And to hear you say that it's not just about the guidelines, it's also about arming parents with something to take to their kids and say, look, it's not just us. It's not just your counselor. Like, these are psychologists saying this. That puts it in a whole different light. Do you think that will be effective? I know younger generations seem to have a deeper understanding of the intricacies of mental health and how important it is, and yet, like, parental struggles are always going to be there. Do you think that that's going to be effective? Parents being able to show this to their kids and say, look, we're trying to tell you the same thing.
Yes, and I think that everyone has to be giving the kids the same messaging across the board. So when you're going to the pediatrician's office, the teachers, the schools, and the training is happening at a very early age to say that we're all on the same boat and that it's not just me. And I think it's really effective when kids hear directly from their pediatrician, by the way, how much screen time? Oh, more than an hour a day? I don't like that. And instead of looking at the screens, if you're watching YouTube, could you watch it on your television instead? Not good for your eyesight. What about playing outside? How many hours a week are you doing it? Are you getting at least 1 hour of physical activity a day? Oh, no, that's not great. So I think it's so important because when kids are talking, when parents are talking to the kids, literally, I have kids in one ear, out the other. I'm tired of you, Mom. You can be quiet now and stop talking. But when it's the pediatrician, my kids listen, they're engaged. And having multiple adults in a kid's life that they respect, that they look up to, sometimes other parents of friends, it's important to have that. And then the teacher. So when they're getting it from multiple sources, look, we as adults get it. We weren't raised with the screens, but we get it. It's so compelling. It's distracting. It's inviting. It feels like you're connected to an entire world. You have all this information. And then the short form videos, we're just drawn to it. So recognizing that the screens are off, and from the very beginning, if you give a phone to a kid to say, it's around that time of, it depends on the parents, but it could be age 10, 11, 12. That is when their brain is most robust growth-wise in terms of like neurological development, puberty, a lot of changing social, emotional stuff at school, handling, girls and boys and dating and romance. There's a lot happening in the brain and the body. And then boom, that's when the phones are thrown in. So this is a very complicated period of time, and it has to be in the fold of the school and the medical office. And now the parents are armed with guidelines. So I think it's going to be advancing the conversation even further.
Dr. Sue Varma, fantastic advice. Thanks so much. I don't know if your kids are watching, but if they are, listen to your mom. She knows what she's talking about. Thanks.
Thank you. I will show them this clip later. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Awesome. And still to come, we're going to dive into the colonial past of one of the royal family's literal crown jewels. But first, Snoop Dogg has a direct message for the streaming industry. Speaking at a music and business conference in Beverly Hills last week, Snoop was presented with the idea that it's an exciting time for artists, and that's when he went a little bit off script.
It's exciting, but streaming got to get the together, because I don't understand how you get paid off of that. Can somebody explain to me how you can get 1 billion streams and not get $1 million? That don't make sense to me. I don't know who running the streaming industry, if you in here or not. But you need to give us some information on how to track this money down.
Let's get around the world in 80 seconds. Today, President Putin said the West is pushing Russia into war, and he made the remarks during the country's Victory Day celebration, honoring the defeat of the Nazis in World War II. He made that speech from Red Square just hours after his military launched another barrage of cruise missiles into Ukraine. And police in Pakistan arrested the country's former Prime Minister Imran Khan today. Authorities dragged Khan from the courthouse where he appeared for a hearing on corruption charges. Now, Khan was booted from his position in a no-confidence vote in April last year, but is still a top opposition leader to the current government, and protests are happening in cities across Pakistan, and at least one demonstrator has reportedly died in clashes with the military. The death toll in Sudan's ongoing clashes is now over 600, and that is including civilians. The UN says over 5,100 people have been hurt as the country's military and a rival paramilitary group battle across the country. Meanwhile, talks between leaders there are happening right now in Saudi Arabia. And overnight, Israeli forces conducted a strike on the leadership of the Islamic Jihad organization in Gaza. At least a dozen people were killed. And shortly after the strike, Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu said the IDF is at the height of an operation and that no one should doubt Israel's resolve to defend its citizens. NBC's Raf Sanchez is in Tel Aviv with the latest.
Hundreds of public bomb shelters are open all across Tel Aviv tonight as Israel braces for retaliation by Palestinian militant groups for those strikes in Gaza this morning. Now, the Israeli military says it successfully targeted 3 senior figures from Palestinian Islamic Jihad. One of them, Israel says, was the commander responsible for firing 100 rockets from Gaza into Israel last week. And the Israeli military says he was planning more strikes to come. But those air raids also killing 10 civilians, including a number of small children, the youngest of whom was a 5-year-old girl. There is a heartbreaking video making the rounds on Palestinian social media tonight showing a different young girl asking, "Where's my father?" Her father, a well-known local dentist, was in fact killed in those Israeli strikes alongside her mother and her brother. Now, the Israeli military says it does not deliberately target civilians and it does everything it can to reduce harm to innocents. But the UN tonight is saying this level of civilian casualties is unacceptable. And I will say these strikes were carried out at 2 a.m. in a residential area while families were sleeping, making it almost inevitable that there would be civilian casualties in this case. Now, Israel is facing a major question as to whether Hamas, the more powerful of the militant groups in Gaza, will put its full weight behind Islamic Jihad, retaliating against Israel for those strikes. If it does, there is a real fear here that we could be facing an all-out war.
Raf, thank you. And if you're a royal watcher, and I mean a true royal watcher, you might have noticed that the famous Koh-i-Noor diamond was missing from King Charles's coronation this weekend. That controversial diamond's origins can be traced back to India, where it was acquired by the British in the 19th century. And right after Queen Elizabeth died, social media was flooded with messages from Indian users urging the British royal family to finally give the diamond back. Now, with India's rise as a global power, the diamond could be used as leverage with the UK to boost diplomacy. And NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer has a story from India.
Gold, jewels, diamonds everywhere.
God save the king!
But in all the pageantry of the king's coronation, one significant piece was missing. From Queen Camilla's crown, which featured dazzling stones for sure, but not the famous Koh-i-Noor diamond, the 105-carat jewel in the crown made for Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, for a coronation in 1937. A centerpiece of the crown jewels since the 19th century, during British colonial rule of the Indian subcontinent.
The earliest records of the Koh-i-Noor diamond place it here in Delhi, in the jewel-studded peacock throne of the Mughal Empire.
For centuries, the treasured gem was passed around, and as the story goes, brought calamity with it. But when Buckingham Palace announced earlier this year that Queen Camilla would not don the Koh-i-Noor, it was less about a curse than to sidestep controversy and growing demands for Britain to give it up.
Seems to have woken up and be working its dark magic again.
Who really owns the Koh-i-Noor is a riddle that reaches back centuries. But understanding where it is now is a journey that starts here in India, passing through Mughal, Persian, and Afghan empires, and the first Maharaja of the Sikh Empire, who received it as a gift.
Britishers documented this, then they made it.
Sandeep Singh Sukarchakia, a lawyer here, claims to be a descendant and says his family is pursuing the Koh-i-Noor to fulfill the Maharaja's dying wish.
This matter is between two royal families.
What makes the claim of your family more legitimate?
The Britishers have taken it illegally. So this doesn't need any legal action. It's just a polite reminder that you are the custodian of this diamond, right? And you should give it back to us.
But after Britain's East India Company annexed Punjab in 1849, the young Maharaja then signed a treaty that gifted the jewel to Queen Victoria. Koh-i-Noor, meaning mountain of light, became a symbol of empire.
And in a sense, the Koh-i-Noor symbolizes that. It's in one tiny little package, as big as an egg, is all the hurt all the feeling of loss, all the feeling of theft, which many Indians now feel about the colonial period.
Giving back the Kohinoor isn't a new debate, but it's louder now with India's rise as a global power. Few have been as determined as Vinod D'Souza.
It is not possible to reply to every letter sent to the Queen or...
He's written 101 physical letters to Buckingham Palace and to the Queen herself.
This is my first letter, which was sent to the Queen, and she replied.
In 2009, you got a reply.
Yeah.
She holds it on behalf of the nation and that they can't do anything about it.
He says he will keep writing to King Charles until the Kohinoor is in its rightful place.
Do you think it'll come back?
I know it's an impossible task, but I have not yet given it up because I have made it as a passion till I'm alive on this earth.
How far are you and your family willing to go to get the diamond back?
After me, my son is going to take care of it. And after him, his son is going to take care of it. It will be continue until it is achieved. We will not rest until our target is met.
An important history that should not be overlooked. Janice Mackey-Freyer, thanks so much. Before we go, mind reading is often the brainchild of movie plots, right?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Don't look up. He'll make me hear another disgusting joke. He's such a schmuck.
Okay, take that, make it AI, artificial intelligence. Yeah, a wild study out of the University of Texas proves that artificial intelligence can translate your thoughts. You're not going to want to miss it. That's insane, and it's coming up right after this. All right, get ready, because tonight's Future of Everything is mind-bending, or actually mind-reading, because it's looking a lot more like AI is capable of reading our thoughts. And we're not just talking about it predicting what kind of TikTok we want to see next or what kind of product we might buy. This next breakthrough is a lot deeper, all the way down to the very tissue of our brains, where researchers have used AI to translate brain scans into text. Now, for this study, scientists at UT Austin created a 3D view of a person's brain while they listened, watched, or imagined a story. And see, we've got it for you right there. That pink stuff, all that pink stuff means above average brain activity, and the blue spots have below average brain activity. And to us, we see that and we're like, okay, that part's activated, that part's not. But researchers say the AI was able to read the brainwaves and translate all of that you're seeing right there into English and turn it into what looks like inner dialogue.
This is a real leap forward compared to what's been done before, which is typically on like single words or short sentences, where you can get something about the gist of a sentence or something about, you know, what a word is related to. But we're getting whole strings of text, pretty complicated ideas.
Okay, so what does that actually look like? Check this out. Here are the volunteers, and the volunteers were asked to watch a movie clip without audio, and this is what the AI described. You're seeing it right there, actual stimulus, and they described, I see a girl that looks just like me get hit on her back, and then she is knocked off, end quote. The eyes saw it, the brain processed it, and the AI typed out what they were thinking. I'm still trying to figure out how that would even work. With us now is Nita Farahani. She is a futurist, an ethicist, a law professor at Duke University, the author of Battle for Your Brain, Defending the Right to Think Freely in the Age of Neurotechnology. Welcome, Doctor. So researchers are saying that they hope that this could one day help victims of like a stroke. But how do you see this type of technology being used?
I think it has tremendous promise in that it actually offers potentially people who have locked-in syndrome, suffering from ALS or other conditions, to be able to have their thoughts interpreted into speech so that they could communicate with the outside world. It also has potential for everyday people to use it. And when that starts to happen, I start to worry about what it looks like for mental privacy and for freedom of thought of individuals.
Now, just to be clear, like in this case, people are sticking electrodes. I mean, there's a lot of monitoring that goes
there's no
in, right?
electrodes.
There's a lot of
so one of the things, one of the things that's extraordinary about this is there are no electrodes. This is a big machine. It's a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine. That means that people went into this machine non-invasively without any electrodes inside of the brain, that they were able to pick up blood flow changes in their brain. And one of the things that's incredibly remarkable about this study is not only the precision of what they picked up, but then they decided to test and see if the model that they created, which was using GPT-1, generative AI, we're all talking about ChatGPT these days, they wanted to see if they could use that same classifier on a portable system, not a big bulky device like fMRI. So they tried it out on something called FNIRS, functional near infrared spectroscopy, which is a wearable device, something that people could use in their everyday lives to track their brain health, to track their, everyday focus and mind wandering. They found that they could get the same level of precision using that kind of portable device with the classifier that they had developed. In other words, everyday mind reading may be possible using devices that we may come to use in our everyday lives.
It's non-invasive and GPT-1. So this was done before GPT-4. We don't know what's on the horizon. Your book talks about mental privacy. What are your concerns when it comes to AI and other neurotechnologies that could infringe on that?
So the coming future that I see is the use of everyday brain wearables. People are used to wearing, for example, sensors that track their heart rate or track their sleep activity in the form of a watch or a ring. Now, companies like Meta and Snap are starting to buy and develop their own neurotechnology to put sensors that track brain activity into everyday devices like earbuds or headphones that people could use to take a conference call, but also track their brain activity, which can be promising for things like tracking brain health or tracking focus and attention. But it also means that the very same corporations who are commodifying all of our personal data are suddenly going to have access to what's happening in our own brains. And then I fear that our right to mental privacy, our right to freedom of thought could substantially be interfered with. We've already seen that kind of interference with things like Cambridge Analytica, when you can start to have much more precise access to what people are thinking and feeling, and then change what they're seeing in their social media or the kinds of algorithms that are feeding different information to them in the platforms that they interact with. I worry that there's a future that we're just not ready for.
Nita, I feel like we should be talking to you every single day. I hope you come back. Thank you so much for this conversation, and hopefully it's one of many more to come. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And that does it for us tonight. Yeah, no problem. Anytime. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you tomorrow. But until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.